I've just found out my recording software has inbuilt sound effects. One of them's called laughter. Okay, how about this one? Inbound, more like outbound. I'm definitely going to have to use this one at some point. Yes, it's already that time. It's time. It's time for the team that... Are they even really a team? I think the Solar Scarabs are more of an idea than a team, more of a concept than any collection of players. What to say about the Solar Scarabs? Oh, it's gonna be a long one. Strap in, get your snacks, start getting the tissues ready to wipe your eyes, get your notepad ready to take notes on who is where and when, who, where, what, why. Oh, I actually had to write notes on all of the things that happened for this team. The rest of these I'm just going to do off the top of my head because it's all still fairly fresh in my mind. But the Scarabs, man, it's like it's pure Charlie Kelly in Always Sunny. Like I need the pegboard ready to go. So the Solar Scarabs were formed at the beginning of season 8, and this was a brand new roster, properly brand new roster. You had, I say properly brand new. Veronica and Layers have played together previously, and been a bit of history between them, but generally a brand new roster. And as I said at the time, going to be one of the lower end teams, but the theme for this team was growth. You had 4 young up and coming players getting their shot in the SBL to really prove themselves, alongside Papa Zatman himself, off the back of 2 world championships, ready to give his wisdom and deign down from on high and provide his insight into how to win games. So the team was Solo or Troll in the solo lane, Layers in the jungle, Boronic in mid, Inbound in support, and Zatman in ADC. Now everyone knew this was going to be a bit of a bumpy ride for this team at first. With lots of new players in a very, very competitive league with lots of very good players, wins were going to be hard to come by, and that proved to be very accurate. Wins were real hard to come by. To say this team started slow is pretty accurate. They weren't good. They weren't good. They had good flashes and good moments here and there, but some slight misplays at certain points. For example, I think Inbound was probably the biggest offender. I mean, I still maintain that Inbound was better than people thought, despite having been a big Inbound hater for a while. But there were just head-scratching moments. I remember losing it big time on stream watching the games once when, as Yamoja, he solo invades the enemy purple while they're doing it, tries to get the steal. So he's by their purple buff, and the next closest person is Zatman doing backcamps at his side. And what do you know? He gets jumped on and killed, and it's what did you think was going to happen there? And then you had Zatman, who, it's fair to say, I don't think his heart was quite in that team. But the sounds of it, what Slaney was saying for scrims and stuff like that, Scrim Zatman wasn't really there. Scrim Zatman is the guy who gets double-digit deaths every scrim and then turns up at the big games. But the sounds of it, he was actually trying hard in scrims. But in the games, the relic usage needed some work. He was saving those relics for the next game, and you could tell the clean, meticulous play that we'd once seen out of Zatman was not quite there. So yeah, this team struggled at first, and they only really got a couple of wins, mainly against sort of the Valhalla Valkyries, and somehow also against the Jade Dragons, who at that time were basically the best team in the league.
And Layers has already fallen. Inbound too low to come in too, but the Titan is down to half, and Zatman free casting, no one putting their attention on him. He's still full HP. Zatman gets it done in the end. The Scarabs find a 2-1 victory over the Dragon. The Kings have fallen.
So it was the Scarabs team at its core that set off what is one of the biggest roster apocalypse dramas I've ever seen, especially in mid-season. You expect this stuff end of year, maybe after a big tournament and stuff like that. But in the middle of the bloody season, kicks off one of the most wild sequence of events that I've ever seen. Yes, it's time for the toilet tussle, the battle of the bathroom. So let's wind our way back to when it all started. So Solo or Troll gets benched by the team in a time of post-pandemic rebuilding, where everyone's trying to get back into the studio, trying to get vaccinated to do so. Solo basically just doesn't organize his and isn't vaccinated and can't come into the studio. And it was at a time, it was the kind of very large bit of straw that broke the feeble camel's back in terms of team morale at that time. Layers had already not been very happy with his team and fundamentally wasn't impressed by their work ethic or, I think what he said was their willingness to, oh, we lost a game, oh no, whatever. And this was the something that really drove him over the edge. And so he kind of put down an ultimatum of either Solo leaves or I leave. And given that, Solo had kind of dropped the ball on this one, Solo gets benched. Meanwhile, post-games, I think quite a bad game, whether it was a scrim, I can't quite remember, a scrim or an SBL game for the Scarabs. God, even saying this, it just sounds ridiculous. Layers goes on a tirade to his parents about how shit his team are and how much he hates them and what a bunch of big poo-poo panties they are. And the one thing he doesn't do is mute his mic. Yes, he, like a scene in a shitty rom-com, he forgets to mute his microphone. And I think it was Boronic and Slaney who were on the call, who heard the whole thing. And I can only imagine the kind of like the office style look where they go at each other. And obviously with a teammate chatting shit about his own players like that, wasn't really going to fly. So Layers gets kicked and Solo is back in. And meanwhile, whilst all of this is happening, there's another bombshell as it turns out the levies are imploding and Julio is being banned. Off goes Yark the Shark from his brief foray into the ADC role back to the solo lane. And they're scratching their head thinking, who can we bring into ADC? Want someone with a bit of experience and someone who's willing to move teams. Looks over the way at Zapman, who's in the middle of the biggest like high school roster drama ever. They snap him up, and so Zapman takes the chance and scoots out for the Leviathans. I think from what was gathered from all of the various interviews, he did it in quite a good way. Spoke to the team, made it clear what's happening. Wasn't just sneaking out the back door, but you can't blame him. Oh, I forgot to mention, how could I forget to mention, because this was the funniest bit of it all, was that when all of this was happening between Layers and Solo or Troll, we saw the battle of the Twitlongers. And my God, I want to see players stop doing Twitlongers. It does not help you. People giving their side of the story, and then Layers releases a Twitlonger, which is one of the most bizarre things I have ever read in my life, where basically I can understand where he's coming from. And so the big picture, to be kind of devil's advocate here, is that Layers is a very kind of homely, home-based sort of person. He likes living with his family, being around his family, and he gets quite homesick quite easily. So we've seen it this season with the Titans, where he just wasn't willing to move to Georgia, which, understandable, each to their own. So he makes the effort to come down, and this is kind of what started off all of this stuff, is that he made the big effort to come down, to play in studio, to live in the kind of house for a while, and then Solo can't play in studio because he's not vaccinated, and he's living in the house, and the house is it's a gamer house, right? So it's not exactly tidy. There's boxes everywhere. Layers goes a bit Karen mode and starts taking photos of all the boxes lying around and like pizza boxes, and then starts taking photos of the toilet and like how the bathroom wasn't cleaned. It's like, bruh. Not everything has to be shared. You can just say, we didn't get along. We didn't see eye to eye. We had different views on certain matters. You don't have to be taking photos of piss stains on the bowl. Although it did leave me my favourite meme of the year, which was piss diff. Whenever I'm losing, I still blame it on piss diff. And I do imagine it has greatly improved the toilet hygiene of any players in Layers' team moving forward. But yeah, basically it was the most high school shit you've ever seen, and it was a huge blow up. And it was frankly embarrassing for both sides involved. And the Scarabs needed to change. So off scoots Zapman, and it felt like a very big loss to that team, because you obviously can't see what it's like behind the scenes, but you imagine the 4 players fairly new to the SBL losing what is quite a big mentor for them. So Zap gone, Stuart is in. Stuart joins the team, and with Layers gone in the jungle, a certain world champion finishes school, and it instantly swept back up. Scream is back in the mix, which I was super excited for, because I've always rated Scream, and I've been waiting for him to come back to the league for a while, and what do you know? There he is. And from the ashes, this team, who everyone kind of thought at this point would be struggling, maybe having a bit of a bad time, they turn out to be kind of good. Stuart, after a slow start, and questions over whether he was really a help or a hindrance, the Stu Rat himself, which every time I think about it just makes me laugh. But yeah, after a slightly slow start, he starts to step into his role, but Scream, from the off, looks fantastic. Brings a whole new energy to the team, a whole new identity. This team now run it down. They get in there. Scream is making an impact on the map in a huge, huge way. And they're getting some good results. And most importantly, they're getting those good results at the right time, because Worlds is coming around. Oh yes, it's that time already. Worlds time was here. Although it is worth remembering, I say good results. That's actually not correct. good performances is more accurate, because they were the 3-game team. You'd get absolutely blown out in one game, typically game 1. You'd have game 2, which would be a bit more competitive, and then game 3, you just lose it. Like, they took every set to a best of 3. They never got 2-0'd, but they always managed to lose 2-1 every single time. So it felt like, you can beat these teams. We see it in individual games. You've just got to string it together. And Worlds comes around, and unfortunately for the Scarabs, they match up against the J Dragons, who, it's the Dragons. You know how good that team is. They're ready to come whoop everyone. Except not quite. Game 1, the Dragons looked dominant, run over the Scarabs, and everyone's expecting a quick 3-0. What actually happened after that was the Solo or Troll masterclass. The whole of the Scarabs just suddenly turned up in a massive way. They played out of their skin, and they just bullied the Dragons. Absolutely bullied them. Final K was the saving grace of that team. He tried to put the team on their back, but everywhere else was losing. Everywhere else was losing. Yeah, those games at Worlds were fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. By far the best set of Worlds. They ran them over. All of them were playing at the absolute top of their game, and it was a joy to see, actually. One of the great World sets, I think. And it just further cemented their history of being a team that just will not lose to the J Dragons. Doesn't matter what happens, they just will not lose. Unfortunately, they came up against the on paper, the strongest team at Worlds in the Titans, who were kind of the favourites to win it going into it. And they did lose in quite a big way, with a really tragic first blood from Solo or Troll, which hurts my eyes to see every time I see it.
Type of pick. I think that it really can be the type of difference maker that they need.
Well, deja vu, it's happening again!
No, it's in the tower!
It's the tower around the minions! Get Solo or Troll Benji with the first blood, so close! But finally that Osiris gets shut down.
Not like this, Score!
All in all, really, really positive. Really positive. It kind of felt like, okay, these guys are here. But it turned out they were not here. Not for very long, because straight away, post-Worlds, the roster changes start happening, as is always tradition. But this was a bad omen of things to come. If you can listen really carefully, you can always hear the clown music playing as the fiesta began. Solo or Troll moves to the Titans to rejoin his best mate Layers, who in that time has hopped in after Scary D has left their jungle role. So Solo or Troll, to keep it in your head, Layers moves from the Scarabs to the Titans, Solo moves from the Scarabs to the Titans, Scary D leaves the jungle of the Titans and hops into the solo lane for the Scarabs. Get used to hearing Scarabs to Titans. It's a bit of a theme. And this team looked a bit lackluster. Solo had really impressed in the solo lane last season, and Scary had been out for a long time, and I think it showed. They didn't look very good. They didn't look the same team that they were. And unfortunately for them, the J Dragons had started to have a mini implosion of their own and had kicked Sam for Soccer, world champion MVP. Sam for Soccer was kicked in what was a pretty big shock at the time. And unfortunately for the Scarabs, who had really impressed in the jungle recently, who had previously teamed with Mike in the past and had a lot of success, Scream. And so the roster merry-go-round continued as Scream hops on over to the J Dragons. But it's not all bad for the Scarabs, because who's lying around free in the jungle role but Mr. Sam for Soccer himself? A player who, at his best, can be fantastic, maybe one of the best in the league. We'll talk about him at his worst a bit later, but a good pickup. This is a really high-tier player joining the Scarabs, and maybe gave their fans a bit of hope. But unfortunately, that merry-go-round hadn't quite stopped just yet. The clown music was still playing, so eventually the team decided to move ahead without inbound. Poor Bobby was left to the sidelines, one of the more controversial players of the team, with some people saying he was good and underrated, some people saying he was absolutely stinky poo-poo. But what he was one of the original Scarabs, and those were coming harder and harder to come by the minute. So inbound gets kicked, and who comes in but the Arc the Shark on his world tour of roles? He decides he's a bit bored of solo, doesn't really like playing for the Leviathans anymore. Time to go to the support role. And if you think that sounds like a very random change, then you and the rest of the league, it only gets weirder from here. It's now officially time for me to start checking my notes, because it just goes all over the place from here. So you've got Yark in solo. God, so even saying I'm getting confused. So you've still got Stuart in ADC. You've got Yark in support. in Baronic in mid lane, Sam in the jungle, Scary D in solo. Then after a certain amount of time, the Titans realize they haven't stolen a player from the Scarabs in a while, so decide, hey Stuart, we're going to kick a Cyclone Spin in what was a mental decision at the time. Do you fancy playing for us? And Stuart, who's just come from the SEC earlier that year, has just gone straight from the Scarabs and followed the proud tradition of jumping onto the Titans. So off goes Stuart, and, well, who goes into the ADC but Yark the Shark on the next stop of his world tour of all the roles. So he's back reprising his role from the beginning of Season 8 back in the ADC. And who joins the support role but former mid laner turn support, Horrorwind. And now they're looking at the team, and it looks like one of those weird fever dreams you have where suddenly Horrorwind's in support, Yarkor's in ADC, and the Scarabs have like no original members. Poor Baronic is just sat there in the middle lane looking at his random players around and thinking, who the hell are these guys? With Slaney watching over like, I don't know either. The breaking of the fellowship has officially happened, and poor Baronic and Slaney are just looking over this mess of a team, this complete patchwork. But just as everyone is saying, oh, look at Slaney and Baronic as the last two remaining Scarabs, what happens? But Slaney leaves. And take a guess where he goes. He joins, drumroll please, the Titans. Oh my god. At this point now, the Titans have more Scarabs than the Scarabs. They now have Layers, Solo Troll, Slaney, and Stuart. They have more former Scarabs than the actual Scarabs. Scarabs fans in absolute tatters at this point. Poor Baronic at this point is really genuinely on his own now. He is the last remaining Scarab. So Snoopy then joins as a coach, but it's at this time that after all of the changes, after all of the beatdown, Baronic leaves the team. I don't think he was kicked. It was never quite said why he left. You've got to suspect from the outside it's because he's thinking, what the fuck is going on with this team? The revolving door that was that team, it's probably really tiring to play through. So with Baronic's departure, there marks the official end of the original Solar Scarabs. Every single one of their players was left, pretty much to the Titans exclusively. And even players that had come in to replace the left players had left again. So what have you got of this team? What is left? Well, it's a really random patchwork hodgepodge of players, all kind of just bundled in together. Oh, and I forgot to mention that somewhere in the middle of this, Netroid is kicked from the Kings and takes the ADC role for the Scarabs. Snoopy, who had taken over coaching, joins the mid lane. So to take some stock of where we are, this is coming into Worlds. This has been over like the whole year that all of this crap has happened. We're now coming into Worlds. So we now have Netroid ADC, Horrorwind support, Snoopy mid, Sam for Soccer jungle, and Scary D solo. I don't know either, man. And they were a funny team to watch because they had some moments of success, but moments of just looking completely and utterly lost. Horrorwind had good moments, but obviously learning as a support. Then they made a few mistakes here and there. You got someone like Sam who's a really on and off player, a Scary D who's an on and off player as well. Yeah, bunch of really, really random plays. But they had something going for them. They had ideas, they were active, got quite a few individual wins in games, so this was not a terrible team. That is until they played against Hex Mambo, where in every single iteration of this team, they just got spanked. They just could not handle this team. In fact, that's where we saw the play of the century, as some wanker called it. Where Deathwalker just absolutely clowned them. It didn't matter what roster this team had. If Solar Scarabs went up against the Hex Mambo, they were always incredible games, always absolutely fantastic games, but Mambo would always win. But yeah, unfortunately, in the quest for qualification, this team got beaten by Mambo again. No Worlds qualification happened, so after all of that, big up and down here and there, people jumping in, people leaving, people joining the Titans, people rejoining the Titans, people who weren't even on the original lineup joining the Titans. You ended up with a team who just lost to an SEC team and didn't qualify for Worlds. And it was just, I think everyone just took a big, deep breath at that point and said, thank God. This team was interesting because this is the first team that really started the debate of what level of roster swaps are normal. Roster swapping has been a huge part of Smite ever since the very early days. There were changes every single month, it seemed like, teams going up and down. But as the league has started to take itself more seriously, more people have started to question, is it normal to have teams swapping entire rosters every 2 minutes? I mean, there was one point where I wanted to make a video about all the roster changes, but it's literally hard to talk about them because you didn't know if the entire roster was going to be different by the end of your sentence. As one time I was like, oh, I'm going to make a video on them this weekend. And the day before, the roster changes again. It's like, this video is going to be out of date in about 10 minutes. So yeah, people were genuinely asking, is this normal? And should this be allowed? Should there be rules in place of certain amounts of changes and swaps? I'm personally someone who thinks that roster changes do make things more interesting. And if you're a team that wants to change, should you be forced to stick with a teammate that you're not getting on with or don't agree with or fundamentally doesn't play like you want to? I'm not sure you should be. But at the same time, I think we can all agree that changes like this, where every 2 minutes someone is changing, really do kind of cheapen the experience to an extent of, who's going to be in the mid lane this time for the Scarabs? It could be anyone. It wouldn't surprise me if this year we see some rules brought in about when changes can be made. Maybe you have sort of 4-week periods, monthly periods, or like split periods after certain tournaments, changes can be made, yada yada. Just some sort of defined period where, okay, now the roster changes are going to happen. Wouldn't surprise me to see that. I don't think there's been any mention of anything like that. So I think Hi-Rez are probably just happy to keep it as is. But you do have to wonder, if this starts happening again, whether it's something that would be really heavily looked at. And so once you get to the end of this roller coaster of a story, it's funny to look back at how it started. I mean, it ended up being like, on America's Next Top Model, where the people just start getting grayed out as they leave. It ended up like that, where that original lineup was shaken up pretty quickly and pretty drastically. But in terms of a churning out of talent, you saw some real winners come out of this team. Obviously, Zatman left to go win his 3rd title with the Leviathans. Layers joined the Titans and looked absolutely fantastic. Solo Troll, again on the Titans, has looked brilliant, and they got to the World Finals with him there, so they've not done badly for themselves. The saddest stories are those of Boronic and Inbound, who, when all of these roster changes are happening and the team is in flux as much as it is, some people are going to fall through the cracks, and that is sadly what happened with them. But yeah, generally they've all done fairly well for themselves. It's like one of those feeder football clubs who makes the big money transfers to the other teams, except here they made no money from it and in fact just suffered as a team. I think the most memorable iteration of this team was the period with Scream and Stewart, because that team really did run it down. They pressed all of their buttons all at once. They were a really good team, and not surprised that they had the success that they did. It's a shame they didn't get to go a bit further in that tournament. They could have been really interesting. But yeah, the Scarabs, man. I think there's something that's going to go down in the folklore of Smite history, because when these changes were happening, when every time you looked at Twitter, there was a new tweet longer about how someone's leaving or someone's going to the Titans yet again. It was wild. It was a wild, wild period. Very entertaining for me, but probably not if you're a Scarabs fan. All I will say is that I feel bad for those people who bought Scarab jerseys, because I imagine by the time that the shipping was, by the time it actually got to your door, that player might already be on the Titans by now. Although a lot of these players haven't been announced in the first 6 teams of who's going to be in the SBL roster, I would be very surprised if any sort of core of this stuck together. I think there's going to be a bunch of players that are just going to want to split and do their own things, because truthfully, I think all of the players on that team think that they're destined for bigger things. Sam Soccer's a world champion MVP. He doesn't want to be not qualifying for Worlds. Netroid has already joined one of those teams. Scary D, 2-time world champion. Hurrywind has already found another roster. Even those that are left from that team are not going to want to stick around. So yeah, what a wild team they were. Godspeed to the Scarabs. Get bugged. Maybe we were the ones who got bugged after all. So that's another team down. On to the Oh No Warriors.